Would you open your door to 25 bikers in the middle of a whiteout with your toddler shivering behind you and $7 in your pocket? I did. 3 days later, 500 engines rolled down my street, and everything I thought I knew about fear, family, and neighbors blew wide open. It was 3:47 a.m., the kind of Detroit cold that bites through drywall and denim, my kitchen humming with that tired fluorescent buzz, bills stacked like crooked tombstones on the table, my boy asleep in a fort of blankets by the stove because the heater had given up and the power flickered like a bad promise. I counted my money twice, 732, which is not a number you can feed a 2-year-old on no matter how you tilt it. And if you've ever breathed through that kind of math at 4 in the morning, you know it sits heavy behind your ribs, you know what I mean. My ex had walked out 8 months earlier to go find himself, and from what I could tell, he found himself with a 23-year-old waitress in Tennessee because he sure didn't find his way back to child support. So it was me in this cold house, and the memory of my mama's voice telling me her fried chicken recipe could carry a woman through hard winters if she let it. I tried to let it, I really did. I turned the living room into a pop-up diner with folding tables and a hand-lettered sign in the front window. Mama's Kitchen. Authentic soul food made with love, and the smell of seasoned flour and hot oil slid into the hallway like a prayer. But people slowed when they saw the menu, then sped up when they saw my face, heads down. Quick steps to the bus stop like my front porch was trouble that could rub off if they stood too close. Do you think that's fair? Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down stood on my stoop and read the sign like she was doing me a favor. Then looked past me into my living room and told me this was a decent neighborhood. To keep my kind of trouble to myself, said it quiet like a knife, then walked away while I smiled the way you smile when your dignity is bleeding and you don't want to let it drip on the floor. My boy coughed in his sleep. Little body, jerking, so I tucked another blanket around him and told myself the storm warnings were exaggerating, that the blizzard would slide past us the way blessings sometimes do. It didn't. The power snapped off that afternoon with a sound like the house exhaled, and the whole place went hard dark. So I lit candles and cranked the gas stove, opened the oven door, and told Marcus we were camping in the kitchen, just the two of us, our own secret fort, where brave boys drink cocoa and listen to the wind and don't cry. Then I heard it. At first I thought it was thunder sitting low to the ground, a rumble under the wind. Then the floorboards started to hum, and a line of headlights cut through the ice on the window like a blade. Motorcycles. In a whiteout. The sound got bigger, then stopped all at once like something decided to hold its breath, and there came 3 knocks at the front door, slow and deliberate like someone who would wait you out. If it were you, what would you have done? I pressed my back to the door and listened to the snow grind under boots. A voice carried over the wind. "Ma'am, we need help. We're freezing out here." Another voice, rough but not mean. "We got a man bleeding bad. Please, just until the storm passes." Every news story I'd ever heard about biker gangs unspooled in my head. Every warning my mother had given me about packs of men who look like trouble because sometimes they are. And meanwhile, my thermostat was dead, my kid was coughing, my heart was trying to crawl out of my chest. Then I heard my mama, not in the room, but in that place where faith sits when you think you've run out. "Baby girl, when someone's in trouble, you help them because one day you'll be the one knocking." My hands shook. I don't mind telling you that I slid the chain back, turned the deadbolt, and opened the door. They came in like men who'd learned how to move, quiet boots, wiped on the matte helmets, tucked under arms, hands open so I could see they meant no harm. Candlelight put soft edges on hard jackets and patches that read, "Hell's Angels," and if that name knots your stomach, mine did too, yeah. That happened. But they carried themselves like soldiers, scanning respectful voices low. "Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Where can we sit that won't be in your way?" The big one in front said, "Thank you. I'm Mike, we won't forget this," and somehow I believed him before I knew why. The injured one was Danny Young and pale jeans soaked dark on one thigh, so I got my plastic bin with bandages and antiseptic and did what my mama taught me when she was a nurse before she ran a kitchen talk: steady, clean, gently wrap, firm, and the room watched like I was stitching the world back together, not just a leg. In the kitchen, a couple of them had already found my flour and oil. One asked from the doorway if it would be all right to cook for everyone. "We got rations, ma'am. We can make it stretch. Call me Keisha," I said. "And yes, I've got plenty. I was trying to run a little restaurant." Mike's eyebrow lifted. "What kind of food? My mama's fried chicken," I said, and the room lifted by 10 degrees on that sentence alone. We ate like a family that night, strangers shoulder to shoulder, their jerky, and my beans, their dried onions, and my spices steam on the windows, Marcus peeking out from his blanket fort, and deciding these giants were not monsters, after all. Between bites, they told me about tours and service, and how civilian life felt like a cold house when your head was still overseas, and Mike told me about his little girl with the blonde pigtails and the disease that took her. How the marriage didn't survive the grief, and I told him about me, about packing lunches with pennies, about being fired for bringing a sick child to work, because there was no one to watch him, about Mrs. Henderson's quiet knife voice. We didn't say the word judgment. We didn't have to, the air knew. Sometime after midnight, the room went still, not quiet, just still the way a creek goes, still when the ice thickens, because Danny started to shiver. Not from cold, from fever. Tommy, older, kind eyes, laid a palm on his forehead and said, "He's burning up, and all that calm these men carry broke like a piece of glass, fast, but clean, voices tight. Can we get him to a hospital? Roads are blocked. What do we do? What if we lose him?" And I heard myself say, "I can help." We fell into a rhythm I learned at my mother's knee: cool cloths, loosen the clothes. Breathe with him until his breath remembers how to be steady, small sips of water, keep the air moving, keep talking to the body so the mind doesn't leave. I held his hand when he reached out and called for his mama from the fever, and I said, "I'm here, baby, you're safe, your friends are here." And just before dawn, the heat came down his face unclenched. His breathing settled, and I said, "He's through the worst of it," and those men exhaled like I had put the roof back on a house they'd been living in without. Morning came gray and quiet. The storm moved on like it had used us up, and they packed with that soldier efficiency gear squared away, helmets snug. "Thank yous," said, without fuss. Tommy let Marcus braid 2 strands of his beard, a little ceremony. We made up on the spot, and Mike pressed an envelope into my palm. I tried to refuse. "It's not charity," he said. "It's payment for services rendered. Also, don't quit on that restaurant, Keisha." I stood on the porch with my boy on my hip and watched 25 taillights disappear into the washed-out morning, and my house felt bigger than a house should feel when it's just 2 people breathing in it. The next 3 days tasted like loneliness again. I bought supplies cooked fresh, made a cleaner sign for the window, opened the door, and waited, and the door stayed closed, because sometimes a zip code weighs more than a welcome mat, and Marcus ran a low fever and refused the medicine without milk, and I had to decide between rent due in 2 weeks and the bottle he would drink from right now. It wasn't a decision. I walked to Mrs. Henderson's porch with my boy on my hip and my pride in my mouth, and asked for a cup of milk, just enough to get the medicine in him. And she pushed me hard enough that I slipped on the ice and hit the sidewalk. My child screaming, and she told me to get off her property and called my baby a name I won't repeat here. Rage flared white, then I swallowed it because my kid was crying and cold, and the day wasn't done. I lifted him and we started home. Kindness met us halfway. An elderly black woman I'd never met was standing on a small porch I'd never noticed. "Honey, come here, let me help you," she said, voice steady like a warm hand. Her name was Martha. She checked my boy with an old stethoscope, found the children's medicine in her bathroom, warmed milk with honey, wrapped a loaf of bread and a bag of groceries, pressed a small envelope into my palm. I tried to refuse, and she insisted I asked her why. And she said, "Because I know what it's like to be alone with a sick child, and because my mama told me kindness comes back when you need it." And I didn't know then how literal she was about to be. Pattern interrupt. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. The house started to shake that afternoon, a tremor under the floor that rattled dishes low at first, like a truck on the big road. Then deeper, heavier, like thunder with a heartbeat. Marcus climbed onto a chair and said, "Mama, what?" That eyes wide like it was Christmas morning. I pulled the curtain and saw chrome before faces, headlights breathing in the cold, and then the river of motorcycles turned onto Maple Street. And didn't stop, not dozens, not even hundreds, 1,000, and more rolling in tight formation, filling both sides of the street, from the corner down to my door, engines humming in one shared chest. They parked in clean lines, kickstands down, then, on an invisible signal, the engines cut in one perfect beat, and the silence landed like snow. And if you've never heard 1-500 machines go quiet together, it feels like the world holding its breath. Mike walked up my front path with Tommy and Jake and the rest I knew, and a woman with a clipboard and paint on her jeans said she was Sarah from Chicago, and behind them were riders from everywhere: Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, men and women, young and old, patches I didn't know sewn next to names. I didn't need. My neighbors came out like prairie dogs, phones, high mouths open. Mrs. Henderson stood on her lawn with a face the color of skim milk, and I stood on my porch with my boy on my hip and thought, this is either a miracle or a problem, and I can't tell which yet. "We told you we don't forget," Mike said, handing me an envelope thick enough to change a week into a month. Then he turned and gestured, and suddenly my yard filled with contractors, electricians, plumbers, folks hauling lumber and conduit benders, and paint people rolling in restaurant equipment, still wrapped in plastic. And Sarah said, "We've got your kitchen design, your dining room expansion, your social media set. Media's already here by tomorrow. You'll be open for real." And I laughed, because laughter is what you do when the impossible is already happening, and your only job is to keep up. Work started like a tide. Somebody took the old stove out, and a team slid in a commercial range. A crew ran new electrical, somebody else cut and fitted stainless tables, the dining room wall came down, and another wall went up 2 feet farther. A sign painter climbed a ladder and free-handed Mama Keisha's kitchen. Where love is the secret ingredient, kids from the block carried brushes like torches, while their parents learned how to tape trim like they'd been born to it. Grills appeared and burgers hit them, and neighbors who had never said my name out loud handed me paper plates and asked if I needed anything. The news vans parked and pointed dishes at the sky like they were trying to beam this whole street up to a better place. And then the twist. Danny walked out onto the porch with a toolbox, looking a lot less like a fever and a lot more like a man, and around his neck hung a small silver pendant I hadn't noticed in the dark, old, and engraved and worn smooth by years of fingers. Martha had wandered over on curiosity and bread, and stood there on the edge of the crowd, and when she saw that pendant, she folded in place like somebody took her knees. "That's my boy's," she whispered, and for a second, the whole street went quiet enough to hear it. I gave one just like that to my son for his 7th birthday, Riverside Apartments fire. We got separated in the smoke. I never found him again. There's an inscription on the back. Love never dies. Danny lifted the pendant, and turned it over with hands that had learned to shake again. And the words were there, the exact words she spoke while he was still turning it, and his hand went to the back of his left ear like a reflex, and she said, "You had a crescent moon birthmark right there." And he said, "Mama," and that was it. 30 years of searching fell away like snow off a warm roof. They met in the middle of the yard, and both of them cried the way people cry when a piece of their life clicks back into place with a sound you can feel in your teeth. After that, even Mrs. Henderson looked smaller, like a person trying to figure out where she went wrong and how to make it right. She crossed the grass, slow, and apologized without excuses, and I looked at her and felt tired, but not angry. I said, "We've all done harm, and we all get to choose what we do next." And she said she wanted to be a better neighbor, and I told her everyone's welcome at my table if they come honest. And meanwhile, the bikers kept working, and the neighbors kept carrying. Tommy dressed my son in a tiny leather vest someone had stitched. Little Angel across, and Marcus ran down the sidewalk like tiny royalty. And toward evening, Mike laid papers on my table, legal crisp, and said, "This is the deed, paid in full, no more rent, no more landlord. Build your business on ground that won't move under you." I tried to hand it back, and he closed my fingers around it and said, "We don't leave debts unpaid, and family is family, simple as that." 6 months later, the restaurant hums like a well-tuned bike, 5 a.m., biscuits rising, honey butter, softening on the stove. Coffee steaming the windows, Danny handling deliveries and payroll, because he turned out to be a numbers guy under all that leather. Martha tweaking a biscuit recipe from her grandmother, so it leans into my chicken just right. Riders still coming through in 2s and 10s, and sometimes 100. When the weather's good, church ladies in hats next to tattooed arms, school kids on field trips eating for free. Because I swore the day those bikes filled my street that no child would ever leave my place hungry. Food critics wrote kind words and a TV crew filmed, and I smiled into a camera I didn't recognize and said, "Kindness built this kitchen, not me, not alone." The best part is smaller, though. It's the way people talk over plates that taste like home. It's how Marcus slides into a booth and asks a man with a skull ring to show him how to hold a wrench. It's watching Mrs. Henderson tip too much, like she's paying an old bill with new tender. It's the sound the room makes when Mike steps through the door, and my boy yells, "Uncle Mike," like it's a name and a job and a promise. Now here's the part that might sit sideways with you, and that's fine. Argue with me in the comments. I want to hear it. People hear Hell's Angels, and they think 1,000 things. Some of them earned, some of them lazy, some of them a mix of truth and TV. And people hear single black mother, and they think 1,000 things too often without meaning to, and a lot of them hurt. A parade of bikes can look like power or protection, depending on where you're standing. A public apology can look like courage or convenience, depending on how much damage was done. And forgiveness is not free. It costs time and humility and work, and it's not owed on demand, like a package delivery. It grows like bread rises slowly, with warmth and patience. When 500 motorcycles take over a residential street to do a good thing, is that community or is it pressure? Who decides the difference? Who holds the power to call it one or the other? When a woman shoves a neighbor on the ice and then shows up with a casserole 6 months later, how many casseroles make it, even should it ever be about, even do you think that's fair? Here's what I know from inside the cold house that turned warm. Appearances are the cheapest thing about a person. Uniforms cut both ways. A crisp suit can smile while it ruins you, and a leather vest can hug your child like a favorite uncle. Kindness is not naive. It's strategy. It's infrastructure. It builds a network faster than any app and a safety net in a zip code that didn't have one. And love can be loud, inconvenient. and exactly the right size to fill the empty spaces. If it were you at that door, would you have opened it? And if you did, would you do it again? Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what part of this rubbed you wrong or sat right in your chest. Tell me if a stranger ever saved you when you didn't think you deserved it, or if a respectable neighbor ever hurt you when you least expected it. Tell me how your block would handle 1-500 bikes and a miracle on a Tuesday. Drop your thoughts below, push back, agree hard. Share your own story, and if this reached you, share it with someone who needs a reason to keep the porch light on. Hit subscribe, tap the bell. Come back tomorrow for another real story that starts in the cold and ends somewhere warm, because we're just getting started.